There you go. Of course.
Okay. Good evening and welcome. I'm Sharon Brodkey, and it is my honor to serve this community as the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council, and I welcome you tonight to our second community conversation. Before we begin, I just want to say a special thank you to all of our rabbis and to Sharon Commissar Langdon, who postponed the weekly Beit Midrash so more people could attend this evening. I'm grateful for your support, and I apologize for the scheduling overlap. I have to say, sadly, that this is one of the most awkward introductions I've ever had to write, and I'm hardly ever short for words or opinions, especially on the subject of anti-Semitism. The JCRC deals in many highly sensitive and impactful areas, and we often joke that among all the delicate and different opinions across a broad Jewish spectrum of practice, belief, disagreement, and discussion, there are really only two things that all Jews can agree upon. Number one is Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I'm the Lord your God, there's only one of me. I think most of the Jewish community is in sync with that. The second thing that we can all agree upon is anti-Semitism. It's a thing. However, if we asked everyone here tonight to define anti-Semitism, to identify it in all of its forms, and to give specific examples of it, we will have as many opinions and answers as there are people in this room, and then some. Because of the recent wave of high-profile celebrity rants, as well as what the Allgemeiner just a couple days ago referred to as an unrelenting wave of street-level anti-Semitic attacks in cities across the US and Europe, Jews are feeling more vulnerable than ever. In fact, Dr. Rabbi David Fox, director of Chai Lifelines Crisis Services, a New York-based nonprofit that provides mental health services to the Jewish community, said that the climate we are living in today has a profoundly negative psychological effect on individual Jews. We are all feeling maligned, humiliated, shamed, and worst of all, we are all afraid. The volume and the nature of calls and visits that I've received over the last few months has been elevated, and the concern and despair are palpable. This is what brings us here tonight. This community conversation is the work of your JCRC. Guided by Jewish values, we advocate, educate, collaborate, and mobilize on issues important to the Jewish community and greater community. We promote the safety and security of Jews everywhere. When we reached out to each of our panelists, there was no hesitation on their part. And I thank you all for being here and the work that you do. I hope that all of us leave here tonight with a sense of empowerment, hope, and a regard for our allies and the public servants who, in sacrifice and sometimes at great risk to themselves, have our backs. Because while this is a very Jewish issue, it's not only about the Jewish community. Jews may be the canary in the coal mine, oftentimes, but this is also about the safety of all people, our greater community, our city, our state, and our country. And now I'd like to invite the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council Board of Directors, Zoe Reikus, to say a few words.
Well, all I can say is wow. I hope you all take a look and see how many people are here. This is just wonderful. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Zoe Reikus, and it is my privilege to serve as the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation of Omaha. And I am thrilled to welcome you to the JCRC's second community conversation. Again, addressing a very sensitive, and in this case, absolutely existential issue for our community. Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Lezeh. All in the house of Israel are responsible for one another. The JCRC continuously works to protect and support Jews at home, in Israel, and around the world. Tonight, we are here to talk about the state of anti-Semitism in Nebraska. Our conversation this evening is not confined to our state borders, nor is it confined to the Jewish community, because we know that where there is bigotry and hatred for Jews, hatred for others also exists. It is important that as Jews who understand the uniqueness of anti-Semitism, we do not leave here without remembering our responsibilities that extend beyond the Jewish community. Equally important to us are the commandments, principles, and Jewish values by which the JCRC operates. Tikkun Olam, our responsibilities to repair the world. Darchai Shalom, the imperative to pursue paths of peace. Lo ta'amod al dam re'acha, to not stand by idly. And just as our community, responsibility for individual obligations does not rest upon the individual alone, but upon the entire community, so we have a responsibility to care and be a voice for others. We must always be mindful of one of the most important values: all of us are created in God's image. Tonight, I have the honor of acknowledging some special guests who have joined us. First, I would like to welcome Nebraska State Senator representing District 20, where the Jewish Community Center sits, John Frederickson, and his husband. Can you stand up, please? Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us. During the campaign, John was the first candidate to answer the call when the JCRC reached out to meet and greet him and chat about issues of concern to the Jewish community, and we wish him success and fulfillment in his first term in the unicameral. Next, I'd like you all to offer a heartfelt thank you to our fearless leader, Phil Malcolm, who stepped into the interim. Go ahead. Phil, I know you're out there. Can you just stand up for a minute? There he is over there. Phil, who stepped into the interim CEO role and who courageously and gracefully guided the JFO through the last year of change and opportunity. Thank you, Phil. Thank you very, very much. And I know you're not going far. That leads me to the next order of business, which is to offer a warm welcome home, Bob Goldberg. Bob Goldberg is our new JFO CEO, and we are thrilled, Bob, to have you and Kim back in Omaha. We're looking forward to the new and exciting days and accomplishments ahead, and we are so grateful for your commitment to the work of the JCRC. Finally, it is my privilege tonight to welcome our friends and partners from the Anti-Defamation League and their newest member of their team, our local ADL community manager, Harmon Maples. Harmon, where are you? Harmon, you have a wonderful and supportive resource in the JCRC and the JFO. And I know I speak for so many in our community when I say we are glad to have ADL here in Omaha. I just asked Harmon to stand, so when we go out for dessert and sweets, you can all pounce over him and ask him questions. As you leave this evening, the Anti-Defamation League has generously provided us with copies of Jonathan Greenblatt's recent book, It Could Happen Here: Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable. Please feel free to take one from the table outside the theater as you leave the JCC tonight. And thank you, David Goldenberg and Harmon, for providing those. Just one housekeeping item before we move on. When you entered this beautiful theater, You were given a note card and a pen, and during the evening, if you wish to ask a question of one of our panelists, please legibly jot it down, and we will be around to collect and share your questions during the Q&A. And now, I would like to introduce the moderator of our panel, Community Relations Director and Public Information Officer of the FBI Omaha Field Office, Amy Adams, not to be confused with Amy Adams from the movies. But, right, but many of you will recognize Amy from her distinguished career as a reporter and news director of WOWT. Amy, I'll leave it to you to introduce our distinguished panelists.
So much, Zoe. And in fact, Sharon and I go way back. She was at WOWT too. We won't say how long ago, but so we've known each other for quite some time. Anyway, welcome everyone to, I know it's going to be a lively and robust discussion tonight. And I want to introduce our panel of experts right off the bat. Beginning on my left is Dr. Ari Kohen. He is professor of political science and the chair of the Norman and Bernice Harris Center for Judaic Studies at UNL. Thank you for being here. Next to him is David Goldenberg. He is the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League Midwest in Chicago. And then, of course, it's my pleasure to introduce my boss, Eugene Kowel, who is special agent in charge for the Nebraska-Iowa FBI Field Office. Now we'll move to the right. James Donahue. James is the Jewish Federation of Omaha's safety and security manager. And then joining us from Mayor Stother's office is Keith Station. Keith is the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the city of Omaha. And then finally, please welcome Felix Ungerman. And Felix is deputy chief of staff for Congressman Bacon. Excuse me, I'm getting over some bronchitis, and it's catching up with me. Here's how we're going to proceed this evening, and I think Zoe kind of said this a little bit. You have your cards that you can write your questions on. Everybody here is going to speak for about 5 minutes, give or take, on their subject, and then we're going to get to your questions. Excuse me again, I'm so sorry. All right. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was doing fine until I start talking. Okay. Dr. Cohen, I'm going to start with you tonight. In 5 minutes or less, tell us everything we need to know about anti-Semitism. No, seriously though, we would like you to explain the religious and historical origins of anti-Semitism and how it is then weaponized in politics and society.
Okay. So, first, thank you. Thanks for inviting me and for giving me an impossible task. When Sharon mentioned that I would have 5 minutes to talk about the historical origins of anti-Semitism and provide you with an overarching history, I laughed because, of course, that's impossible. But I know that so many in this room are very well versed in this topic. I guess fortunately for me, because then I don't have to say as much, but unfortunately because you all have to know about this topic. So I'll say just a few things, and then I'll reserve some time because I assume there'll be lots and lots of questions and comments as we go forward. It occurred to me a few years ago when I was asked the first time to go and speak about anti-Semitism that I just assumed everybody understood what anti-Semitism was and where it came from and what it looked like. And that when somebody trotted out an age-old anti-Semitic trope, everybody looked at it and said, I know what that is. I've seen it in the 1930s, and I've seen it 500 years before that as well. And it turned out I was wrong. I grew up knowing what those things were, and so it was obvious to me when someone made a comment about George Soros, for example, controlling everything, that what they were talking about was the rich Jews and the global international financiers, and it was just a new version of the Rothschilds. But it turned out other people didn't know that. And so I launched into this, I guess, what is now a public speaking tour where I talk to people about what anti-Semitism is and where it comes from. And of course, it comes from a long, long time ago. It comes from, it has a very, very old religious roots. And the old religious way of understanding anti-Semitism has been around for a very long time, and it's never left us. You can still see it today. It's perhaps not as prominent, where there's not as much concern, for example, about the Jews killing Jesus as perhaps there used to be. But there is still, a vibrant, unfortunately, community of people who take real religious exception to the existence of Jews and Judaism. And you can find them online. You can find them here in Nebraska. There's a movement of people who are, for example, very angry that the Vatican changed its position on the Jews. And they would like, Catholicism to go back to the good old days when they blamed the Jews for things. It's certainly still around. But more and more, what I tend to talk about and what I tend to point people to and what most people want to hear about and discuss is the way that anti-Semitism is weaponized, usually for political ends. And we see that quite often these days. And it typically takes the form of some idea that is rooted in a conspiracy. If you scratch the surface of just about every conspiracy that's out there, there's anti-Semitism underneath it. And it's usually not very deep. You don't have to look very, very hard to find it. Once and what we've seen, and perhaps other people will talk about this, but certainly I can answer questions about it if you like later. What we tend to see is that for a very long time, anti-Semitism tended to be papered over with code words. So there were ways of talking about the Jews and how the Jews have too much power and the Jews have too much influence and the Jews have too much money and the Jews control everything without actually saying those things, right? So you use the code words and the people who you want to understand your message, they'll hear your message loud and clear. But what's happened recently is that people have stopped using the code words and they've just started saying, it's the Jews. And that's been, I think, one of the biggest changes. If I ask people, as I sometimes do, like how many of you feel like anti-Semitism is on the rise right now? There's more anti-Semitism than there used to be 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Most people's hands go up and say, yes, I think that's the case. And part of that, what you're responding to, is how overt it is, rather than how coded it used to be. So when I was growing up, it felt like there wasn't a lot of anti-Semitism. That's not the case. It just wasn't so overt. And now it's obviously sort of mainstreamed. We see it quite often from whether it's on university campuses, whether it's celebrities, whether it's people having dinner at Mar-a-Lago, we're able to see it much more clearly in some sense. But in every case, it's people who are taking these ideas and saying, I want this outcome, right? I want some political aim to be accomplished. I want to get something that I'm not getting. My group is losing out, or I'm personally losing out. And if I figure out who's at fault, I'm sure I'll know it's actually the Jews, right? They're the ones who are doing it. Whether it's the Great Replacement theory that's broadcast to millions of people on Tucker Carlson's show all the time about the people coming from Central and South America to take our country away from us, and they're being, of course, brought here by the Jews, or whether it's straightforward Holocaust denial. We're certainly seeing the mainstreaming of these ideas that used to be kind of an undercurrent rather than so overt. So I'll stop there because it's probably been at least 5 minutes. I'll turn it over to whomever is next.
Thank you, and I have so many questions. The question part for what you're saying, a very good point, especially how it's so overt now and what led to that, but I'm sure somebody out there is going to ask that question, so we don't have to worry about it. So while we're on the subject of anti-Semitism and its roots as well as current manifestations, I'd like to turn to David Goldenberg, and we'd like you to speak to the ADL's efforts to collect and share data, how you work with federal, regional, and local law enforcement, and about the ADL's Center on Extremism.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much. It's a real treat to be here, and an even greater treat to be sitting here next to Ari. Ari and I met each other 30 years ago in BBYO in the Detroit area and served on the regional board together and then went to school at Michigan State together. And we haven't seen each other probably in over 25 years, though we follow each other very closely on Facebook. So ADL's been tracking anti-Semitic incidents since 1979. And the reality is that last year was the highest total number of anti-Semitic incidents that we've ever tracked. 4 out of the last 5 years have been the highest. And so I can look at sort of the numbers from 2020 to 2021, and what I can tell you is we'll come out with our 2022 numbers probably in April-ish or so. But what I can tell you anecdotally is that by Halloween of last year, our team in the Midwest had responded to more incidents than we had in the entire year previously, right? So Halloween-ish. And my guess is it was probably earlier than Halloween. It just happened to be that was when our tracker caught up to the work that we had been doing. And when I think about sort of the numbers, I can look at year over year and I can tell you, okay, there was I think it was about a 21% increase from 2020 to 2021. But what I find most concerning, especially when we look across the Midwest, is we had an over 220% increase in anti-Semitic incidents from 2016 to 2021. So you can always find sort of like anomalies in the numbers year over year, right? But when you look at the broader trend over a certain amount of time, that's undeniable. And one of the things that I think perhaps is most concerning, I don't know if there's members of the media in here, but off record, tomorrow morning ADL will be releasing our annual survey of anti-Semitic incidents, or not, anti-Semitic attitudes. And what I can tell you, and this is a global, we call it our Global 100 survey. We have been conducting this survey since the mid-1960s. And 1964 was kind of the high mark. And these are basically taking a look at, for those of us who have answered a poll, you can't really call someone when they pick up the phone and you go, hey, are you an anti-Semite or are you anti-Semitic? And they say yes, okay, we'll check them over here, right? But instead what we do is we look at the historical anti-Semitic tropes, the ones that Ari was talking about, right? Jews have too much power, they're greedy, dual loyalty, responsible for the death of Jesus, the deicide, kind of across the board. And we ask questions like, do you think this is true? And if they say yes or likely yes, we count them as having anti-Semitic propensities, right? So the high watermark was roughly 28% in 1964. It generally dropped down beginning in the mid-90s and kind of hovered between 11 and 14%. And for those of you who know anything about polls, clearly within the margin of error. So generally, let's just kind of assume that it's been kind of level. The biggest concern that we've had is that incidents, it just takes one person to commit an act, and that counts as one. In all of those incidents, when we look at incidents, we're not just talking about what we would consider to be legally defined hate crimes. We're talking about incidents of harassment, vandalism, and assault. And we work with JCRC, we work with law enforcement across the board to track and monitor these. That just takes one person. The concern that we've had as we continue to see this rise in anti-Semitic incidents is that eventually attitudes are going to catch up. So I would encourage you to read our news release tomorrow and the coverage that'll be out there, and you're going to be quite concerned, is what I can tell you. And so those attitudes in many ways, which is much more concerning, because then you start talking about hearts and minds of people, are starting to catch up to the number of incidents. And that's what really concerns me. And that's when I think about ADL's education programs or anti-bias work. That's where that stuff comes in handy. Now, ADL's Center on Extremism, I'm probably getting close to my 5 minutes, but I'll go really fast. is a part of ADL that has been around, not necessarily in this name, but really since like the 1930s and 1920s. And what we have been doing is we track and monitor and expose extremists, ultimately with the goal of stopping them from doing bad things. We identify and infiltrate networks of extremists online, ultimately to identify those who might say, boy, wouldn't it be great if there are a lot fewer Jews? Number two, that they show us that they have capability, so we can see a picture of them with their AR-15. And number three, geographically, we can figure out where they are. And we work with law enforcement to make sure, obviously a very legal way, but to make sure that those incidents are stopped. We had roughly 2,500 assists to law enforcement in the last calendar year, and we were credited with stopping roughly 24 potentially very violent incidents from occurring.
Thank you, David.
Absolutely.
SAC Kowel, because of their wide-ranging impact, investigating hate crimes is a high priority for the FBI. Please explain how the FBI conducts these investigations and what types of anti-Semitic activity and threat levels the FBI is seeing locally and nationwide.
Sure. Thank you, Amy. I did not go to school or college with anyone on the panel. And I would just point out, it's not the 30 years that dates you, it's the use of Facebook. Exactly. I think that's really what really dates you. But
100%.
Yeah. So, Amy, thanks for the question. I don't know how many of you have personal experiences with the FBI. Well, actually, I know a few of you. But so the FBI, we're spread out across the country. But here in Iowa, Nebraska, the way we're spread out is, our headquarters city office is here in Omaha. And then we have 8 offices throughout the states. In Nebraska, we have an office in Lincoln, Grand Island, North Platte, and then 5 others in Iowa. And from each one of these offices, we have agents and analysts and professional staff who stand ready to respond to whatever the priority is. We focus on everything from counterterrorism to counterintelligence to criminal to cyber. But I will say that hate crimes, which I'm very happy to be here today, is one of our highest priorities. Especially in the civil rights program. One thing I was reflecting on as I was coming today was the recent passing of Barbara Walters. And I didn't really follow her career closely, but I did learn one interesting thing, and that's what she has in common with Anne Frank and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And any of you know what that is? Yeah, they're all born in the same year, right? They're all born in 1929. And when I saw that, it really resonated with me and sort of the work we do in the FBI because, we sometimes can feel like the Holocaust or the era of Jim Crow and rampant hate crimes and disenfranchisement of a huge section of our society here in America, of our own citizens, was a long time ago. But really, we're not even one generation removed from these events. And the FBI, we're very cognizant of that. Like when we're as new agents, we all go to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And I think this is a program the ADL started about 20 years ago, where every new agent class goes there for a day. And when we do that, when we go there, we don't go there to learn about just general multiculturalism or respecting people of different religions or faiths or ethnicities, although that's a part of it. We really go there to see what happens when law enforcement fails to uphold their own laws and fails to protect their citizens, and to see those abuses, and to see sort of the worst case scenario. And so that's something we take to heart. Our mission in the FBI is twofold. It's to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And we take both of those very seriously. So when a hate crime occurs, a hate crime is kind of a two-part thing as it's defined in federal law. And one is it's a normal crime, usually a crime of violence, assault, homicide, arson, coupled with bias, coupled with the intent that this crime was committed due to someone's ethnicity, country of origin, sexual orientation, religion. And one thing we have found in the FBI is of the hate crimes that are committed, of the data we've seen that are reported, of the hate crimes that are committed for a religious motivation, anti-Semitic events make up the majority of those. I think the last year was 63%. And that's, of course, against the population of Jews in America, which I think is hovering around 2.4%. So we stand ready to respond to these events. What we do is many of these, some things the FBI works, we investigate very proactively, right? We become aware of something kind of ahead of time. We gather intelligence. We use sources. we dismantle an organized crime network, a terrorism plot. Hate crimes often is very reactive, like something's happened. And we learn about it from our partners, from community groups like the ADL who report things to us that they've seen, from the news, media, and we work very closely with our state and local partners to investigate those crimes. Sometimes we'll prosecute them on the state level, sometimes on the federal level, but it's something we take very seriously and use every tool and every resource we have to go after those subjects when those occur. So that's sort of the broad snapshot of how we're positioned here in Nebraska and Iowa, and how we investigate and try to mitigate the threat from hate crimes.
Sir? And next, we're going to go back to my right. I'm going to hear from James Donahue. As Safety and Security Manager of the Jewish Federation of Omaha, you are one of the many professionals across the country who are part of the Jewish Federations of North America's Live Secure initiative. And that is a program to harden and improve Jewish communal security at a local level. So James, will you please share with us the specific tactics and strategies that you lead and what's being done here in Omaha to keep this campus and community safe and welcoming in partnership with law enforcement agencies, synagogues, federations, the secure community networks, and your donors?
Yes, thank you all for being here. And so my job really has two facets of it. I work for the campus. I am in charge of safety and security on the campus, but I also work with the community as well. And I do that because I feel I cannot keep this campus safe without working with members of the community and for members of the community, because as a Jewish federation, as a Jewish community center, anti-Semitism is deeply ingrained into one of the threats that affect us here each and every day. And so for the campus, I monitor events and threats that may take place to or happen on campus. Just kind of generally day to day, I handle a lot of the security aspects. So if any of you get a fender bender leaving tonight, it'll come across my desk tomorrow morning. And I also try to just be a general security reference for the members and hear the members and any questions or concerns that they may have and field those questions and concerns and sit down and explain what we're doing to keep everyone safe here on campus. Now, for the community, I try to be a security reference for the synagogues to lean on. I host trainings. Those trainings are being widened to the broader community. There are things like Be Aware, situational awareness training, countering an active threat, what to do in a hostage situation, things like that are all I'm rolling out into the community within the next year. I also respond to anti-Semitic events within the community from an evidence and intelligence gathering standpoint. So we try to put the pieces together, look at maybe why this happened, who this happened to, and maybe who did this, and then work with federal, state, and local law enforcement officials to help coordinate that response as to why that happened. And so, and I feel really honored to be able to do that for this community, because there's a lot of good people here who really need that service, who before this initiative came to light didn't really know who to turn to and didn't really know where to go to. On a broader perspective, so I monitor things nationally. I look for trends that may be happening, what I'm hearing from my brothers and sisters in the security fields at other Jewish federations throughout the country. I look for things, for instance, are we seeing a lot of certain types of flyers being dropped? Or are we seeing swastikas being spray painted on the sides of schools or parks or things like that? That way it gives me an idea from a broad national perspective, some of the things that may be coming our way, and it just kind of helps be prepared for some of the things that we may see. I also work with a network of intelligence analysts, and I also work as an intelligence analyst for the community here with a network of people in the Midwest who really just kind of put all the pieces together. That way, when incidents happen, if something happens in Kansas City, it's not just a Kansas City incident, it's a Midwest incident, and we can maybe link that back to a national incident. I really try to be the intelligence hub for the community. That way these things don't just die. We can put the pieces together, and what would otherwise be an isolated incident can be connected to someone else. And so just to give you an idea, because we're here to talk about anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism, in the Midwest, since December 1st of 2022, my team and I, we've linked 14 new social media accounts to local extremist groups. These are people who, didn't just retweet one or two things. These are people who are really drinking the Kool-Aid and either follow or are followed by people who are linked to extremist groups. And I mean, these accounts, they come and go all the time. And so there's a lot of them out there, but since December 1st, we found 14 new ones that we have been able to link to extremist groups. We have 8 accounts of suspicious email events. And so someone who may email just something goofy, whether it be anti-Semitic or just otherwise inappropriate to Jewish institutions. We've had 6 legitimate phishing and spoofing events. And so people that are trying to steal identities. One thing that happened recently is an extremist group would set up websites that it looked exactly, almost a mirror image of what synagogues' websites look like, almost word for word. And they would send that out in a mass text, mass email campaign, trying to just catch somebody looking for donations to go to the synagogue, while actually the money was being forwarded to the hate groups. And so, unfortunately, these are not dumb people that we're tracking or that we're looking for. There were 4 suspicious mailing events mailed to Jewish institutions, so actually things that were received in the mail that were suspicious, whether they're stained, inappropriate, anti-Semitic, the rhetoric goes on and on. We've had 2 directly threatening phone calls made to Jewish institutions in the Midwest, 1 directly threatening email, and then, to be honest, one person who directly told a rabbi they were going to put him into an oven. And so it doesn't end. And I know that that's extreme, but these are the kind of people that we're dealing with, and these are the types of anti-Semitism that's on the rise, and these are the things that we deal with from day to day. And this is just in the Midwest. This isn't Brooklyn, this isn't Philadelphia. They have a lot of their own problems too, and I don't want to downplay that, but we really want to try to help put the pieces together and give the community an avenue to turn to and help educate what to do when these kinds of things happen. Because the truth is, a lot of these groups and people who do these things, they do these things because they're looking for attention. So when they come through and you get a flyer drop in your neighborhood, they want that media attention. They want it to be on Facebook. There's even websites where they go to repost all the news articles that have been written about their flyer drop. All the times that their flyer drop was mentioned on social media, they brag about it. They love that stuff. So not only do they do that, but that tells them where to direct their attention to. They continually hit the targets where they get the most attention, because that's where they know their efforts are best directed. And so that's a little bit of what I do. And
All right, thank you, James. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce again Keith Station, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the City of Omaha. Now, Keith, you are leading the city's efforts to expand awareness and have mindful and respectful conversations about inclusion. You and your team are focused on intentional development of a more inclusive community, which means finding ways to make every Omahan feel invested, valued, heard, included, and safe. So, Keith, talk to us about how you are working to make Omaha more inclusive and safer and a better community.
Thank you, Amy. Can you hear me? Test, test. First, thank you for just the invitation, Sharon. I really appreciate this. It's been great to be in this facility and to share space with you all. There's some folks in this room who I deeply respect. Wendy, and I'm looking at Toba and Eleanor there with Toba, and certainly my fellow panelists. I love opportunities to share with the community and talk and just dialogue about what we can all do to make our community more inclusive. And the way I've approached it is to understand that we need to work to expand, first acknowledge and then expand a culture of inclusion. So the way that the work looks in the city is to figure out ways to role model what a culture of inclusion looks like in a municipal corporation such as the City of Omaha. We have about 3,500 employees across 11 or 12 different departments and tons of subdivisions. And the culture in the city there are a vast number of different types of cultures, because we have everything from public works departments and streets and maintenance to libraries to law enforcement, law department, planning department, the convention and visitors bureau. So all these different types of roles, certainly the fire department, police, all these different types of roles that have many subcultures within them. And so the task at hand is, how do we make sure that we help our 3,500 employees appreciate expanding a culture of inclusion at the city. There are tons of reasons why we know that that's a priority for us. So my job is to, first and foremost, is to advise the mayor on issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and lots of other duties as assigned. I work to manage and liaise with several boards and commissions that exist in the city. Some that are created. There are over 40 boards and commissions that at the city. Some created by state mandate, some by city ordinance, and some by executive order. The mayor can start a committee or comprised of members of the community or city employees. And so some of the boards and commissions that I get to work with are, the mayor has a group called the Mayor's Commission for Citizens with Disabilities. She has a group that is called the Mayor's Native American Advisory Board. That was started in 2017, and that was a product of the result of the killing of Zachary Berryhills, the Native gentleman that was killed, that had a mental health episode. We have the Mayor's City Employee Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Board, and a community member Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Board. So there's lots of ways, and we also have LGBTQ plus advisory board that is comprised of community members. So all these different ways and opportunities for us to align, for us to role model, for us to tap the knowledge base and expertise and lived experience of individuals that reflect our community. Omaha is something like the 37th or 38th most segregated city in the country. We are the 39th largest city in the country in terms of population. And so while we are high on the level of segregation, we're also a very diverse community. And so what gives there? And why is that? And what does that mean for where we go buy groceries, and how our healthcare needs are met, and how we are treated in the justice system, and where our youth are educated and to what level? So we have all these different ways that we need to meet the diversity of our community and diversity in all the ways. And so it's an honor for me to help shepherd that work. I work alongside a board of my coworkers who, again, are across departments that are helping to lead that work. We have retained the services of an organization called the National League of Cities. And the National League of Cities has a division that works specifically with cities who want to get around diversity, equity, inclusion work. And so we retain their services to help us to refine our plan and to develop training for all 3,500 employees at the city. So we've got our work cut out for us. And so I've been there for just over 2 years now, about 2.5 years, and it's been great. It's what the mayor has given us is a special leadership platform, again, to champion the work, to align with other organizations and initiatives in the community that are doing the work, to call out issues that need to be addressed, to bring perspective and responsible conversation about, diversity, equity, inclusion. Experts say you can't microwave it, but you also can't slow walk equity work. You have to get to it and remain urgent in the ways we address and eradicate hate and bias and racism in our community. Again, sometimes delineating between, for me anyway, between the city of Omaha, the employer, and the city of Omaha, the community. Our work is primarily focused internally first. We are thinking about how do we augment our employment brand? How do we reimagine what it means to work for the city? Some of you might have city jobs as sort of mundane jobs where we don't bring creativity and dynamic innovation to the workplace. But we want to undo that. We want to get out of that. And we want to make sure that we attract talented, creative people to the city and we retain them. One of the things I'm sure a lot of you know, one of the things that is most important in our work is to retain good employees and to make sure that people that work for the city are our greatest promoter. And so we're working to do that. We're working to make sure that all city employees understand that they are cared for and they are valued and that we want them to stay. We are experiencing this phenomenon, this great resignation phenomenon. That's just, we are still trying to get our arms around what it means and why it's happening. And as we do that, what the data has told us is the most important thing you can do is make sure you keep good people and that you are the type of organization that attracts good people. And so we're working to do that, and I'm honored to do that. I'm from here, born and raised. I'm a North Omaha native. Went to Central High School. And any Central Eagles in here? Anybody? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, see, Felix? And North High, okay. University of Nebraska, left Florida, Texas, and I've been back here for about 11 years now. And so I'm one of those boomerangs, and so it's been an honor to be back in Omaha now in this role. Last thing I'll say, then I'll stop, is the way I approach the work is I feel like while this is an inaugural role for the city and for me, I'm a steward of this moment, of this seat right now. And if I do the work correctly, then one day, a long time from now, when Mayor Stothert is not the mayor anymore, her successor will maintain this role and hopefully make space for somebody to continue to expand the way that the city of Omaha, the employer, and the community can be more inclusive. It's not a destination. It's not a place we're trying to get to. We're trying to make sure that our value system reflects a more inclusive way, a continuously improved, more inclusive way of doing business. We don't have a profit motive, but we are commissioned with making sure that we are taking care of the citizens of the city of Omaha. And so that's how I look at the impact is are we equipping our employees to meet the needs of community members in many different ways. I'll stop there. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you, Keith. And now, of course, we have Felix Ungerman, who is Deputy Chief of Staff for Congressman Don Bacon. And I'm going to say a little bit of background before I let you start. As you know, everyone knows, back in June of 2021, the Senate passed Resolution 252, which recommits to combating anti-Semitism in all forms. It also calls on elected officials, faith leaders, and civil society leaders to denounce and combat all manifestations of anti-Semitism. Since that resolution is passed, studies have shown, and we've talked about it this evening, anti-Semitic incidents and racist slurs have skyrocketed on social media platforms, and there has been a significant increase in violent crimes targeting visibly identifiable Jews and other minorities. The ADL reported in their most recent audit that they are seeing a 40-year high in anti-Semitic acts such as assault, vandalism, and harassment in the past year. And in fact, last month, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff hosted Jewish leaders at the White House, where he addressed efforts to combat hate crimes. So now we'll put you on the spot, Felix. Right. Can you share what actions and advocacy is occurring in the House and the role representatives are empowered to play in helping to stem this tide? And also, what are Representative Bacon and his colleagues doing to help remedy this worrisome trend?
All right. Can you hear me okay? All right, volume coming up, good. No? Okay. Hello, check. It's getting a little better. We're getting there. In the back? No, more? Okay. Just let me know when I'm getting too much. Okay, how we doing? Good? Okay, I think everybody's generally okay with that. I had started off with some data that has been covered, I think, pretty well, so I'll kind of just hit maybe a couple points on what we have been seeing as well. But let me start off with saying thank you very much for hosting this, and thank you for putting the wisest people on this side of the stage, because anybody who would, wear a beard, clearly we know that's a sign of wisdom. So the bearded people are on this side. So thank you, I appreciate that. It's kind of more of a lazy holdover from the holidays, but. So we had looked at some FBI reports, some ADL, the audit from 2022 that was released, found the same things that you've already talked about. Some interesting things, we saw some very specific spikes in like the New York City area, where in 2022 anti-Semitic hate crimes were up 114% over 2021. September 2022, 149 anti-Jewish specific hate crimes were seen in just the first half of 2022, and that was reported in September of last year. The one that really kind of caught my attention, nobody really talks about. We talk about social media, we talk about things going on, even some celebrities and public figures. The one that kind of caught my attention was a report in December of this past year by ADL that talked about how 2.3 million teenagers have been exposed to white supremacist ideology in multiplayer games online, in gaming. It was games like Roblox, World of Warcraft, Fortnite, Apex Legends, League of Legends, Madden, NFL, Overwatch, and Call of Duty. I've heard of all but maybe one or two of those, and I've got grandchildren that play some of those games, and I thought, my goodness, 2.3 million have been exposed to those types of sentiments when they're still forming what they think about the world. And I remember when I was younger, and well, it was definitely not the games of today. It was more like the Pongs of yesterday. But they were just fun entertainment, and it was addictive. It was like I enjoyed the challenge, the competition. But now when it comes to ideologies being subtly or overtly put in there, that's very concerning. And that adds another dimension to how, what your first question was to Ari about how are these things being weaponized through the games that we're paying money for and letting our children just spend time, we think, enjoying. So that was a concern. But to the point in the question about Congress, Congressman Bacon's been very involved and active in this area. So has Congress itself. I kind of categorize the things I want to share with you into actions, advocacy, and education. Representative Bacon is a member of the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus, which states that they are the only bipartisan pro-Israel caucus working group in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it was established in 2006. Their purpose is for spearheading legislative efforts to fight for an indivisible Jerusalem, combating the BDS movement, and anti-Semitism. They sponsored the Taylor Force Act and support Israel's right to safe and secure borders. He's also a member of the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, which is also in the Senate. They have two different ones, but they both have the same name. It's just the Senate and House version. The House Task Force was reinstated in the 114th Congress, which is every 2 years, and we're in the 118th. So really, it's been over 7 years since that one was reinstituted. Excuse me. Over 100 bipartisan members in the House currently participate in that caucus, and its efforts of condemning anti-Semitism, spearheading initiatives to address anti-Semitism, and promoting religious tolerance. It also serves to educate its members on anti-Semitism and promoting Holocaust remembrance. One note, I have a bunch of things that I brought with me if anybody wants to read them more specifically afterwards. On 5 December 2022, there was a joint letter of both the Senate and House that went out from the task force with 150 member signatures to President Biden advocating for a unified national strategy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. So there's the advocacy piece that's coming from these organizations in Congress that are seeking to shape and move what's happening to deal with, to track, to monitor, and to deal with anti-Semitism. But I think that would probably be the closest thing we've seen to like something with a national security strategy, if that were to come about, and probably the most powerful piece of a government response to this. So I'm encouraged by that. Hope you are as well. 15 December 2022, last year, there was a bipartisan House resolution that was enacted with 85 members signed on to it, condemning anti-Semitic celebrities and public figures. So in particular, there was a press release put out about this. Congressman Bacon in that said that combating anti-Semitism should not be a partisan issue. With the rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric and attacks, we need to stand united with the Jewish communities here in the United States and around the world. This legislative effort also affirms the need to educate Americans on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism through civility, tolerance, and holding to account those who perpetrate anti-Semitism. we can do something to make this world a better place. And then it said, be it resolved that the House of Representatives, as a unified body, condemns the increase in anti-Semitism in the public sphere, calls on national faith leaders and all denominations and Americans to influence to join with current and former elected leaders to use their platforms to the maximum extent to speak out about anti-Semitism. Second, stands in unity with the Jewish people in the United States and around the world against the rising anti-Semitism. And third, asserts the need for robust education on the Holocaust, genocide, and long history of anti-Semitism to combat the rising tide of hate. November 2022, Representative Bacon sent a letter to the House Appropriations leadership advocating for an increase in FEMA funding up from $250 million to $360 million for nonprofit security grant programs for the Urban Area Security Initiatives program and the DHS state security programs for nonprofits. 2022, they had $250 million. It was insufficient for the amount of requests that came in for purposes like protecting synagogues, increasing security apparatus, monitoring, tracking, some of these intel things that were talked about. How can they do that? They may not have large budgets and ability to do that. These grant programs go towards those. And there were 3,500 requests received in 2022, but they could only fund 1,800 of them with the $250 million that they had. So there were many who did not get their grants funded. This advocated for increased funding, and I didn't have the specific numbers, but I had heard from Sharon that there was an increase, and it was upwards of $300 million. I'll have to look into the exact amount. But that's encouraging that the next round, hopefully those who did not get the funding will reapply and have the opportunity to institute the things they need to combat anti-Semitism in our synagogues, in our churches, and in the nonprofit sectors. Back in June, there was a letter with 92 bipartisan members that went to Secretary Mayorkas to reiterate their concerns about anti-Semitic threats in America, targeting the Jewish community that has been seen over the recent years, and they asked him to advocate for a comprehensive whole-of-government strategy led by the Department of Homeland Security to address the growing problem of domestic anti-Semitism. Earlier that year, there was a 36 bipartisan member letter sent to the administration urging action against an anti-Semitic mapping project that was created by an anonymous movement within the BDS movement that was targeting, tracking, intimidating, and deliberately trying to do harm to the Jewish community, specifically in the Boston area, but more applicable to the nation if it were adopted. Back in May of 2022, House Resolution 1125 condemned the rising tide of anti-Semitism, which called on elected officials, faith leaders, civil society leaders to use their platforms to condemn and combat any forms of anti-Semitism anywhere seen. 4 February, going back to 2022, a letter from 40 bipartisan members went to the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, to admonish them and ask for their immediate end to the delays on investigating complaints of anti-Semitism across college campuses, and so that they could enact resolve to fix those issues because they were happening so much at that time and so frequently. And some of them had been going on for over 18 months, and they said that's excessive. We need to get after this problem sooner. There's more, and I would just, I'll hit a couple others in different categories. That's really the heaviness of advocacy that's going on. And I'd love to just say this is all Representative Bacon's, but the word bipartisan was throughout that. The numbers were fairly significant. This is a sense of the whole of Congress getting after this problem. I wish the numbers were much higher than 100 or 90 or 40 or 30, and I think they will be. Certainly things are passing to enact funding to address these problems, and that's good because that is a majority that has to pass that. So I will say that the Congressman is extremely proud to see that H.R. 943, the Never Again Holocaust Education Act, became law in May of 2020, going back a little earlier. He was very heavily involved in that. He also advocated directly with the state legislature And I know Eleanor and I both had testified at the state legislature for LB 888, which was the state sort of equivalent of that mandate of Holocaust education in our schools. So I wanted to hit a highlight there on that we have to do more of that. We can't let that, I thought about September 11th and how, some of us who were there and have some age behind us think, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember how I felt there. There's so many people now that's like something from the past you read about in a history book. Well, we have to keep that mindset that if we don't educate them, they're not going to understand it. They weren't there. And so to your point, Ari, I think we have to do way more because people don't have that common understanding. And then just as a last point to conclude before I show you a quick clip of a speech on the floor, in 2019, Congressman Bacon was very proud to be able to invite the first rabbi to give a prayer on the floor of the House to open session. It was Rabbi Stephen Abraham from Bethel Synagogue. That's on our YouTube page, but that was really cool to kind of be able to facilitate a first like that. And I know he was very proud, and so was the community. So with that said, there's a short video clip, and I'll stop there. I welcome any questions about anything on that or afterwards. I'll be happy to share. So if you've got a clip, let's go for it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to address the very concerning uptick in hate crimes against members of the Jewish community in recent weeks. To be clear, these incidents have not been isolated, and their sheer volume should frighten us all. We must do more to acknowledge these crimes against our Jewish brothers and sisters and ensure the perpetrators of these crimes are held accountable. Perhaps the most telling sign of how dangerous things have gotten is the statistical data. Those who clearly identify as Jews with their garb and outward trappings have been viciously and frequently targeted. According to the ADL, there have been an 80% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. Some include Nazi propaganda in public parks, and synagogues, as well as suspensions in schools related to anti-Semitic attacks. In Lincoln, Nebraska, the South Street Temple was spray-painted with swastikas and racial epitaphs. In Omaha, about 75 headstones were toppled and more than $50,000 in damage caused at the Temple Israel Cemetery. I've repeatedly condemned this behavior and stand with Nebraska Jewish community and all of those across the U.S. who've experienced similar situations. Recently, I had the pleasure of meeting one of the most prominent leaders of the Orthodox Jewish community, Rabbi David Hofstadter, the son of Holocaust survivors, who founded the Dirshu, the largest Torah organization in the world. Rabbi Hofstadter was compelled to come to Washington to address my colleagues and I about the very serious issues related to the safety and security of the state of Israel, including the hatred towards Israel that has manifested itself in many cases towards the entire Jewish people. I committed to Rabbi Hofstadter that we in Congress will do everything in our power to continue standing up for the Jewish people and ensuring their safety from New York to Nebraska and all across the United States. During his address to my colleagues and I, the rabbi remarked that perhaps at no time since the 1930s have we found ourselves in a more similar situation. Jewish lives are being threatened both domestically and on a global scale. However, after watching the hate crimes against our Jewish brothers and sisters over the last few weeks, it's abundantly clear that the rabbi's words were sadly and tragically understated. It's time for all of us in Congress to wake up to the reality of the hatred that's being directed towards the Jewish people and ensure that never again truly means never again. Cowardice emboldens the enemy. What Rabbi Hofstadter and the Dirshu represent is the true antidote to this venomous hatred that has been exhibited towards the community he leads. We must not buckle under fear, but rather call out the haters and show that the Jewish people as a community will never stand down. They will continue to practice their Jewish heritage with their heads held high. Out of the darkness of the Holocaust, the rabbi decided to dedicate his life to reviving the levels of Jewish scholarship and education to the levels that were predating the Holocaust. As the son of Holocaust survivors, the rabbi's personal life's mission that he's chosen to undertake and execute upon ought to serve as a source of inspiration for every member of this legislative body. Just as Martin Luther King once said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, but only love can do that. So I thank Rabbi Hofstadter for all that he and the members of the Dirshu continue to do to advance Jewish scholarship and education in the face of the evil that has been perpetrated on their community in recent weeks. May God bless them all. May God bless the United States of America. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Felix. And now it is time that we're going to turn to the audience for questions. And Pam and Sharon, there you are. Okay. Do we have any yet? Okay. All right. While we're waiting, since I'm with the FBI and my boss is here, I'm going to give you a question, sir, if that's all right. If we can start, if that's all right with you guys while we get going. I guess one of the big questions is if someone witnesses anti-Semitism or thinks they do, or thinks that they've witnessed a threat, what should they do? Who should they call? What should be done?
Sure. Well, it's very simple. We encourage you to call us. I mean, we spend a lot of time in the FBI doing panels like this, talking to community members, bringing community members into our office to meet with them. And the whole point of that outreach is that we find the greater degree that all of you out there know that we're here, trust us, find us to be a good partner. We hope that you'll call us when you become aware of things. Some things that are reported to us aren't actionable in terms of criminal investigative work. Some things are, but we encourage you to call us, to call your local office, call 1-800-FBI, go online to fbi.gov. Any way you do it, it'll come back to us. Call me directly, email anyone you know in the FBI here, and we'll respond. One thing I just want to point out that's, I think, interesting is I want to emphasize, in the FBI, we don't scrape the internet. We don't monitor hate groups. There are many groups out there that say horrific things, but horrific as they are, that is protected speech under the First Amendment. And the FBI, we can't, and you don't want us to monitor free speech like that. So we really do rely upon groups such as the ADL, just members of the public, that if you see something, if you see someone post online something which is a threat of violence or a threat of a crime motivated by bias or is otherwise alarming to you, that you call us. And if those elements are present, we will take a look and we'll do whatever we can to mitigate that threat.
Thank you. And I know Pam and is your microphone working there?
Hello.
There you go.
Okay, this one is for Ari. Why have the Jews been singled out over the centuries? It's kind of there's another question that's very similar. Why just the Jews? Why not other religions, cultures, et cetera? Because they have money, status, et cetera.
Well, it's a great question. It's the million-dollar question, really. I think if we could get to the bottom of it, we would be in much better shape than we are. Historically, Jews were different. They looked different. They dress in a distinctive way. They ate different foods. They believed different things. Often spoke a different language. And difference itself is noteworthy. But there's something I always talk about, which is that people who get interested in conspiracy theories, the reason that the conspiracy theories work is that they offer a neat and kind of tidy package. They offer an answer to things that are actually mysterious. They demystify the mysterious. Why does the world work the way that it does? Well, the nice thing about a conspiracy is that it has an answer for you ready-made. And if it turns out that the answer that the conspiracy offers you isn't correct, it also offers you the opposite, right? And so there's always an answer. And that's part of why people are attracted to them. These ideas of conspiratorial thinking, and they center around something like a small group that has been around for a very long time and that seems to people to be disproportionately influential. And as a result, there must be something nefarious there. There must be some reason behind it that all of these conspiracy theories like to point to and say, well, this explains all of your problems, and it's a neat and tidy package.
Thank you. Okay, we have so many good questions here. This one is on anti-Semitism on college campuses. How do you suggest that college students respond to anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hate? And who do students report that behavior to?
Dave, why don't you take that one?
Thank you.
So I talked a lot about kind of the broader statistics. One of perhaps the most alarming statistics is the dramatic increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the educational setting. So even before COVID, we had looked at anti-Semitic incidents. Let's just start with K through 12 schools. And we looked at it from 2018 to 2020. Nationally, ADL had tracked a 19% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in K through 12 schools. In the Midwest, for whatever reason, it was nearly 60%. When we looked at our most recent audit on college campuses, from 2020 to 2021, we saw a more than 100% increase in anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses, overwhelmingly rooted in something that had to do with Israel, right? And we have to understand in many ways the organizing that's occurred on college campuses is coordinated. It is being executed in a very professional way. Among the first sort of real big kind of more BDS type movements actually occurred when Ari and I were at school at Michigan State. And it was driven, and this was, we're talking, mid-90s here. And since then it's grown, which is why you often see sort of a cookie cutter campaign that's being executed by campus to campus to campus to campus, because they're having success. And when we look at these anti-Semitic incidents, I think it's important, there's a couple things that are going on. The BDS movement is not just anti-Semitic, or it's not just anti-Israel in nature, right? We can go through clinical definitions of the differences between anti-Israel and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, but the reality and the way that it's manifesting itself on college campuses today is there is no line really in between, right? The goal about it is to make Jewish students feel uncomfortable in their own skin. And I believe the longer term play also is to disassociate Israel from the Jewish identity as college students go through it, because they're afraid to express support for Israel on campus. We hear from students who say, we had a student once come up, a couple of us were talking to these students from Tufts, pretty progressive university, right? And they said, how do you do it? How do you have progressive views that focus on civil rights and also be openly Jewish? That was the question. How are you openly Jewish and also support what might be considered to be progressive causes, like civil rights issues? And we said to these students, myself and another regional director, we said, do you mean pro-Israel and progressive? And they said, no, Jewish. They said, if I could go to Hillel and go to like a Shabbat dinner, that's fine. But if I want to take on a leadership role in Hillel, I want to be president of a student-led group, a Jewish student-led group, I can't also participate in in a progressive movement in anything having to do with racial justice, abortion rights, anything you can think of on the more progressive side, because we will be demonized. How could we that support a colonial state in Israel possibly also look at trying to dismantle systems of racism or address issues around civil rights? That's the reality that college students are facing. Most of the anti-Semitism is coming from the left on college campuses, and where it's coming on the right, you see white supremacist groups that are actually actively trying to organize and recruit on college campuses. You have situations where white supremacist groups are setting up tables outside the union. And if you think back to Charlottesville, yeah, there were a couple people in black combat boots, but generally they were wearing khakis and polo shirts. And those logos looked really fancy, and you'd think, oh, look at that, it's an Abercrombie and Fitch. Maybe I just dated myself again. But the reality is it's a fancy, professionally done logo for a white supremacist group. And so that's the reality of what we're dealing with on college campuses. And so what we're working on right now that we're going to start piloting actually in the Big Ten, in the Midwest, is the idea of having an anti-Semitism fellow embedded in Hillel, that ADL is actually partnering with Hillel to work with students to engage other students to talk about anti-Semitism. Because the reality is there's the peer connection that doesn't currently exist, and I'm pretty excited about it. We're going to start piloting it in Minnesota and Indiana, and hopefully we'll be able to do it here in Nebraska too. This is all literally in the last 2 weeks that it's kind of come together.
Thank you. This one's for Keith. What action would be taken if city employees displayed anti-Semitism in person or online?
The first thing that would be done is a city employee that would make an act, an anti-Semitic act, would be subjected to the Human Resources Department. We have a labor relations lawyer leader that sort of is the first contact for somebody who has had a complaint on them, and they have a due process to be heard, to have as many sides as possible, understand what happened, what was said, what parties were involved, is there proof, and we go from there. Depending on how egregious the incident is, if it was intentional versus a situation where somebody was not educated on language they used, if they used a trope, or if they made a remark, or if they showed someone a video, that's taken into consideration. Sometimes what makes it tricky is sometimes people don't intend to be racist or prejudiced or anti-Semitic in their heart. They just are jerks. And it's hard to prove that somebody is just not a jerk and actually is intentionally being discriminatory in the workplace. And so the city, as a municipal corporation, is very, very careful and very prudent in how we practice eradicating those issues, but we are intentional about making sure that is fair. There are some specific instances that I can't mention where things have been addressed that look like maybe a reassignment or a suspension or education for someone, direct education and learning. We have tried to position the training, the sensitivity training and the diversity inclusion training that we're doing as a perk. It's you get to do this. It's not an arm twist. There are lots of organizations that don't have the budget or don't have the means to offer professional development or equip people with the tools, information, and resources that they may need to make the workplace better. And we are investing in that. And so we make sure people understand that. And we are, elevating the business case and the values case at the same clip and not doing one or the other more, meaning the business case for diversity, inclusion, and expanded awareness is good for business. The data says it's good for business. The values case says it's the right thing to do. And just because you do one of them doesn't mean you have to do less of the other. Let's do it because it's good for business, and let's do it because it's better to care about our people and our environment and our colleagues. And let's help people understand because a lot of people don't understand that if you are mindful of the things you do and say, it makes your environment better too. So we are trying to change hearts and minds at the micro level and also change the system at the macro level. The change management system level, culture building at that level. I hope that answered your question, whoever asked that question. See me after if I did.
Thank you, Keith. We're going to get to as many questions as we can, and we are not censoring any questions, but we are trying to group them. Many people are asking similar questions, so we're trying to weed through all that. This one is, I'm concerned because this community anti-Semitism discussion, which is absolutely necessary, began because Kanye, Kyrie Irving, and Dave Chappelle made statements that were blatantly anti-Semitic. But this has been festering for years as a dog whistle in politics, on TV and radio. Why were we not alarmed then? Or is it because 3 black men made obvious statements, whereas Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, Sean Hannity, and politicians like DeSantis, Mastriano, etc., are white? I'm going to kick this to Dave. I think, yeah. Okay, thank you.
I think that what I can offer is this, is I don't, from an ADL perspective, I think we've been pretty consistent in calling it out. And I say that statement not in a defensive way. I mean, we've been running a campaign now for the last 4 years to get Tucker Carlson kicked off the air for his racism, for his xenophobia, for, as Ari mentioned, pushing narratives along the Great Replacement theory, etc. And others like that. Now we're not for profit. We're a 501c3, so we have to be careful when it comes to politicians. But we have very much been, I think, very directive, or very direct about it, and that's from an ADL perspective. But I also think that I don't remember who said, maybe Ari said it earlier, but just sort of, you know, it's usually only the dog who hears the dog whistles, but we're all hearing them now. And I believe, number one, I think within the Jewish community, there's been an increased, acute awareness of what's going on, because we see a rise in the number of incidents, not just the rhetoric. I think that is a very high profile incidents. But I would also say that I think that the Jewish community has a responsibility to not only speak out, share facts, and show strength to other, when it affects the Jewish community, but when it affects other communities as well, right? I think that we have to use our voice and our strength to speak out for others, right? And I think that's, I mean, perhaps that's maybe unique about ADL's mission, that is, and it was written in 1913, to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. And our general view is that you can't fight one form of hate without fighting all forms of hate. And what we've focused on, at least as an organization, and I think that it can serve as a good model, because I mean, it is what JCRC does and spends a lot of time on, and that is, how do you show allyship? How do you show, and how do you actually show up when you need to? And not in a superficial way, but in a way that is long-term. We, in the Midwest, started what we called an anti-hate table. And we're excited to bring it here to Nebraska and Omaha. But one of the things that we've really focused on is we ask each other, and this is made up of about 75 different groups representing just about every possible community you can think of. The biggest question that we have at the beginning of the meeting is, what can I do to support you in your community? And we look for answers. And we've been taking steps, and we now have legislative priorities in different places that I can tell you are maybe tangential to ADL's mission, but they are totally core to our partners in the Urban League, or totally core to our partners in Asian Americans Advancing Justice, or totally core to Unidos, or MALDEF, or other types of Latino organizations. And in many ways, it's how do you show up for others, and how do you speak out, even if it has nothing to do with you.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Go ahead.
Sorry, one thing I want to say, you know, and David, he touched on it. You can't just fight one specific kind of hate, because hate knows no bounds. Hate knows no religions. It doesn't matter if you're young, old, white, what race you come from, hatred is hatred. And one thing I think the ADL does very well is their No Place for Hate campaign. I love that, because we can't just stand and say, we're not going to stand for anti-Semitism. We need to stand up as a community and say, we're not going to stand for hate. And one of the things that I do is I monitor hate groups that are anti-Muslim, that are anti-Asian, that are anti-Christian, because it's all still hate. And at the end of the day, if we stand up as a community and say, we're not going to stand for hate, like the ADL does with their No Place for Hate campaign, we're going to move forward as a people and as humans, and at the end of the day, we're going to be stronger, because again, you know, hate is hate.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of combine a couple questions for Felix here. So one question is talking about the Holocaust bill that we passed in the Nebraska legislature. And the questioner asks, have we seen schools adopt it yet? And if so, what has the impact been? And the other question is also about how can our elected representatives, like Representative Bacon, do a better job of denouncing anti-Semitic tropes being circulated by their fellow Congress members?
It's a great question. Let me start with probably the quickest and easiest. We can all do better, and I think he has to be quick to denounce them publicly whenever it's found. And you mentioned about why one group versus another, why one political way versus another. Wrong is wrong, and hate is hate, as was already said. And when it's found, it has to be denounced. And you heard his words on a floor speech, which was published live on CNN. That same thing has to be a constant thing. I believe that's in his heart, but we can all do better. And I think his intent would be to do better. So I think really, and this community does not do a bad job of highlighting things. I'll get calls on hundreds of different topics each day. And a call will come in highlighting something, and I'll say, I genuinely did not know about that. Thank you for highlighting it. Can you give me the source? And then we push that as quickly as we can to our team in DC when he's there, or we push it to our team here in the district to say, hey, this is wrong. We got to put something out. We got to say something. But you can't be selective at all. That's anybody would recognize that as not being adoptive of this. Wrong is wrong, hate is hate, and anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. You can't qualify it or selectively apply it. As far as the Holocaust bill, my understanding is there was not funding applied to that, and in this legislature there's going to be a follow-on bill that will apply funding to it for the schools. I would have to kind of yield the rest of that answer to the Institute for Holocaust Education here as to how much they've done. And I see my friends back there in the middle who might have some words to offer about what they've been able to do to provide curriculum and do some work in that area with the schools.
I'm Scott Lidke. I'm the director of the Institute for Holocaust Education. We're continuing to advocate for Holocaust education in the same way we always have, through programming, through educational program, through special directed programs, and we're working with teachers right now in the development of a curriculum map as the first step to be used in the implementation of the legislation. When the funding comes through, it'll even grow to a greater level with that. But let me just give you an example of what we are doing. We have a program that we do called the Anne Frank Traveling Education and Traveling Exhibit. Starting tomorrow, we're training at Westside High School, and it's a peer-to-peer training program. There are 2,000 students at Westside, and 2,000 students will participate in seeing this exhibit. We're plans to be in one of our other larger districts in this city next year, and there's a lot of movement throughout the state, and we have a lot of partners that we work with, and as soon as the funding comes through, it's even going to take it to another level.
Thank you, Scott. And I will add to that even though bill introduction is still going on in the UNICAM, we have co-authored a bill that will put some teeth behind that 888 and will actually provide funding for some of this Holocaust education. Sorry, squatting is not good. Gotta get back on the yoga mat. Next question. A short while back, Jonathan Greenblatt belatedly confessed that the ADL has not focused enough on left-wing anti-Semitism, in particular, campus anti-Semitism, congressional tolerance of such, and other comments by TV personalities have become more mainstream. Comments?
Yeah, I think that Jonathan, who is ADL's CEO, and by the way, in the book, he talks about this extensively, about anti-Semitism on the left. I think we were a little slow And we should have been more vocal, and we should have been more aggressive quicker. I think that we've likened it to anti-Semitism on the right has historically, if you think about it, like a Category 5 hurricane. You know it's going to come through, you know it's going to do damage, and you know it's going to be significant. Because when you look at the ideologies that have driven acts of violence toward Jews have historically come more from those who ascribe to right-wing ideologies. It's been much more violent, the way it's manifested itself. Anti-Semitism on the left, in many ways, has kind of been like climate change. It's kind of been building and building and building, and there's no more stopping it. It's now adapting to it and responding to it and trying to stop it, right? And I think that's how we've kind of looked at it. And we have owned that we should have been more aggressive. But I think that we've been incredibly aggressive over the last few years, especially. I mean, I've been at ADL now for almost 4 years. And across the Midwest, when you think about sort of, even just in the congressional sphere, the Midwest region that I cover, we have Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, we have Betty McCollum, we have Andre Carson, we have Chewy Garcia, we had Maureen Newman. We have a whole host of rights. So if you want to think about who are the kind of like the those who get put up on a poster from a congressional side, and we deal with it on a regular basis. And I think that we have to call it out, as was said down at the end, right? From our wiser side of the panel. You have to call it out from where it is, right? And I think that that's, I also think, by the way, as an organization, I think it's important, I say this very clearly, not in an offensive way, I think it's important to be retrospective. I think it's important to say, look, we got it right here, and we didn't get it as right as we should have the first time. But we're going to make sure we address it moving forward.
Thank you. This is going to kind of dovetail, Dave, on what you said, and I'm going to ask Special Agent Kowel if there is a particular demographic, psychographic that is drawn to these hate groups or the online extremism, some people more vulnerable than others. Can you answer that from the FBI's knowledge base and perspective?
It's a great question. I mean, there's no one demographic that's more susceptible to hate than others. We do become increasingly alarmed by the sort of lone wolf phenomenon. I mean, decades ago, if you wanted to become radicalized, you had to go meet some other people who shared these beliefs, whether it's on the terrorism side or the hate crime side, international terrorism or domestic terrorism. And nowadays, it's very easy for people, as we all know, sitting in their basement, to find like-minded individuals. And what we worry about is the movement from flash to bang is much quicker. Like, it's very easy for someone to become radicalized by hate speech and decide to take action very quickly without acting with other people. And if they're not acting with other people, it becomes very hard for us to intercept that activity before it occurs. We do see in active shooter events, I mean, listen, you know, if you look at active shooter events across the past couple of decades, they do majorly come from young men, but anyone is susceptible to hate violence and to hate speech. And in fact, here in Iowa, you know, we had a successful federal prosecution and conviction of a woman who, you know, deliberately used her vehicle to target minority children and try to run them over. So, you know, I really would hesitate to point any one demographic as, you know, we don't look at demographic. We look at, you know, is there an allegation of criminal activity? Is there a bias involved to make it a hate crime? And we don't really focus at all on what the demographic is.
If I can just add maybe just one other thing too, to emphasize this lone wolf piece is, if you look at like these large mass shootings, whether it be Poway, Tree of Life, Charleston AME Baptist Church, Christchurch, New Zealand, you know, kind of across the board, none of these were committed by people you would consider to be, shall we say, card-carrying members of a hate group. They were inspired by different ideologies online. They have access to those ideologies. They were radicalized and they took action. But I think it's important to emphasize this lone wolf piece is that, yeah, they weren't like members of a neo-Nazi group or the Klan or the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers. They were inspired by those ideologies, but they weren't like attending active meetings or anything like that.
So I guess the moral of the story is that we all have to be vigilant. We have a number of wonderful resources in our community between the JCRC, the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, IHG. James is a fabulous, if you hear about a flyer or if you see something, say something, give us all a call. We all work together and we're not going to stop. And just on a final program note before we all dismissed for sweets and good stuff, we do have a unique opportunity coming up a week from this Saturday on the 21st here at the J. We are going to have another community conversation with Maharat Rory Bernice. She is my counterpart in St. Louis. She is on the front lines of racial justice. She was on the front lines in Ferguson. She's been arrested. She has great stories and experience to share, and she's going to help us as a community start moving in the direction that we need to go to pick up where we left off before COVID with improving Black-Jewish community relations. And on February 27th, we are going to close out Black History Month with a Black-Jewish dialogue here as our next community conversation. So be watching the Jewish press, be watching our social media, and we'll keep you guys posted on that. So,
Sharon, David just wanted to add one more thing quickly.
To offer an uplifting piece a little bit here, because this has been a pretty heavy conversation as we all get ready to go to bed. It's this story about this really wealthy couple that has some college students over to their home, and out in the back they have this incredibly gorgeous lake, and they invite them all out there and they say, come on out, let's have some drinks. And they look in the lake and they see in the middle of the lake there's this rock, and sitting on the rock is this turtle. The problem is the turtle's stuck because there's piranhas and alligators in the lake and they can't get out. If any of you can get to that rock and get that turtle, pick him up and get him out safely, we'll give you anything you want, wealth, whatever it might be. They sit there for a couple minutes, nobody moves. They say, all right. They turn around, start walking back into the house, and they turn around, there's a kid in the lake, bobbing and weaving back and forth in between the piranhas and the alligators. All of a sudden he gets to the rock, dripping wet, bends down, looks at the turtle, jumps back in the water, again bobbing and weaving in between. Finally gets to the other side, out, dripping wet, out of breath, hanging like this. The couple comes running around, they go, that was amazing. What is it that you want? What can we possibly give you? You saved the turtle. The kid looks at them, shrugs and goes, I just want to know who pushed me in the lake. You see, for those of us who are sitting up here on the stage, like, we get paid to jump into the lake. We get paid to jump into the lake head first. It's our jobs. And we always find ourselves in situations where we get pushed into the lake. That can happen in our workplace. It can happen around the kitchen table. And so that question about kind of how to use your voice and that I was asked earlier, really it's up to us to speak out, to share facts, and to show strength. And so when we think about it, it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be from an FBI perspective of running a Jewish Department of Studies or the city or a member of Congress or the ADL or JCRC. We each have the power and the ability to affect change in our own lives. And so perhaps if you take anything from this, at least, I just didn't want us to end with just, oh my gosh, so much drear. But there's this optimism and this hope because we each do control and have the ability to affect change.